Welcome to Day Zero.
Well, welcome back to Day Zero. Today we're joined with the newest founding partner, Sean. Welcome on board.
Thanks, Gus. Great to be here. Excited to be here.
So, Sean, it is fair to say that we spent a lot of time up front together talking about, was this going to be the right fit for you? What were you looking for in your career to progress? And also what was important to you? And I think one of the things that really resonated with me out of the gate when we first met you is you often talked about how you help talk a client out of a bad decision and how you actually make sure that you're positioning the client thinking long term. And what I mean by that is that you're making sure that when you buy a property for that client, that they're going to come back in 10 years and say, thank you so much. That was the best decision of my life. And you helped me with an array of things. And I think what the partnership between FOUNDIT and you and my is we can help you with the research. We can help to elevate you with the technology, but all of your local market expertise and the professionalism that you bring is a league above everyone else. So we're incredibly privileged to have you on board, and thank you.
Thanks for the kind word. It means a lot.
So let's get into a little bit about you growing up, and for the listeners to hear a little bit outside of real estate. We'll come to real estate, but give us a little bit of background about yourself.
So, born and bred in Malaysia, right? I'm one of 5 kids. Left home when I was 20 to come to Australia. The plan was initially to explore life a little bit. You know, Dad sent me here for uni, did that for a year. And in that year experience, I kind of fell in love with the country, really loved that independence factor, and told myself that I wanted to make this home. So here I am, 18, 19 years later. But yeah.
What did you study?
So my background was in finance and marketing, my degree. Did that in uni. And then in order to stay in the country, I had to go back to uni and further my studies again. So I packed up, left Perth back then, went to Queensland, studied at the University of Queensland, did my Masters of International Economics and Finance. And Gus, the goal back then, to be honest, was to be in banking, investment banking, consulting, that sort of thing. And yeah, that never really materialized because that was post-GFC, firstly. Immigration policies had come crashing down. They were tightening up all these policies to, and whatever I studied economics back then wasn't really required in the country. So I had to find a different pathway. So spent about a year in Brisbane after my master's trying to look for a job. Job market was dead. Decided overnight that I had to just pack up and move down to Sydney because of the bigger job market. So drove down, started life, accidentally met this company actually who was actually in media. So domain.com.au, I was working for the Chinese version of that. I was selling ads. Part of that job, because it was such a boutique firm, you were doing everything. I was looking at the finances. I was looking at the selling side of the ads. I was looking at the production, right? But that kind of opened up my doors into real estate because all my clients back then were real estate agents. And my first boss, David Howe from McGrath Northbridge back then, looked at me one day and said, he was a client of mine buying ads. And he said, I think you'd actually be good in real estate. Why don't you come in, put on a suit and do open homes with me? And that was my first foray into real estate. Putting on a suit, opening up houses, talking to buyers. Back then we were selling $4, $5, $6, $7, $8 million houses. And I thought, hey, this is easy. This is great, right? I love interacting with people. It was fun. So I gained residency closer to 2016. And I think, started my career in real estate in 2016. Thought I'd give it a crack. Was very fortunate to be starting in a great area under a great tutelage. That lasted for about 15 months. Market was tough. I think there was a part of me that when I started real estate in hindsight, I think I was naive, like a lot of young agents, right? You look at the houses, you look at the commissions, you look at the cars, and you're like, I could do this. But about 15 months in, wasn't making money. I was, 30 at that point. And I thought, what am I doing with my life? I've got 2 degrees in my back pocket. Parents were getting a bit worried about, and it's a natural thing for parents to be concerned about your kids. And at that point, I kind of decided that I was maybe going to give up the Australian dream and walk away, head back to Malaysia, go into corporate, climb that corporate ladder, live a good life. However, before I made that decision, I got reached out by Michael Coombs, who was part of that firm as well, and said, I heard you're leaving. Would like to have a chat to you. So had that chat. He offered me a job. And I did tell him, I said, look, I've got a one-way ticket. I might be back, might never be back. So I went away, backpacked for about 4 months through Asia, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Great time. Even spent about a month teaching English in a village for about a couple of weeks. That was great.
Cool. Yeah.
And at the end of that Eat, Pray, Love trip, I call it, I decided to give Australia and real estate one last crack. And I kind of figured if I can't make it with Mike, I won't make it anywhere else. So I came back, started that process with him in 2018, and the rest was history. Succeeded in the selling side of things.
Do you want to maybe give the listeners a little bit more insight into Coombs, what property he represents, what markets he represents, and for people that might not be property, anyone property knows the name.
Yeah, absolutely. So Coombs is probably one of the most dominant agents in that luxury end of the market, and I'm very grateful for that experience. I mean, he was the guy that exposed me into that luxury and helped me understand what these homes are all about, taught me to deal with these buyers, because it's quite different when you're dealing with a first home buy versus a $20, $30, $40 million buy, right? The mindset's different. Understanding the psychology behind doing deals at that point. And he was a gun with putting deals together. So looking back again, I'm grateful for the tutor leaders I've had in my career. David had taught me a lot about systems, processes, data, very structured. Mike was different in other ways as well. And I look back at that, every part of that journey had kind of molded me into the person I am today, the professional I am today. And for that, I'm grateful. I think each of them had their own strengths, and I was able to draw from that strength and experience. But yeah, being in those two experiences at that point with David and Mike, it just gave me a real good understanding about houses, the low and offshore markets, because these two agents were really dominant in their core area. Yeah. And I think that's, again, taught me how to be that dominant player in the buyer agent space right now. What's important, people talk about market knowledge, for example. How deep does market knowledge really go? I've got my own philosophy around that, which we'll speak about later on. But yeah, it's all these little bits that I've been able to draw from these top agents that has made me who I am today as an operator.
And has allowed you to apply it onto the buyer agent side, which we'll come to next, to dominate in probably one of the most competitive markets, but also one of the most luxurious markets in the country as well.
Yep.
Inside of that journey, one of the roles that you had was a buyer manager.
Yep.
And I think it's a great breeding ground for buyers agents to actually be a buyer manager role, because you get to deal with a huge amount of volume of buyers and understand their needs, their psyche, what is going on 100%. As to what they actually need. And doing it at that top end of the market for, as you said, the buyers that you're dealing with at 20, 30 million, they're very different to a first home buyer at 550,000. Can you talk about what are some of the differences that sit with a $20 million buyer versus a $500,000 buyer, and how you have to handle it with a different level of care? And give us a bit of insight into that.
First home buyers are normally it's a first property they've ever bought. They're starting in that process. There's a lot more hand-holding in that process there. A lot more due diligence to get them to the finish line. A lot of more questions. Again, someone's about to drop money on the biggest ever investment. That's a scary thought, right? It's like first day you're learning how to ride a bike. Once you've learned to ride a bike, you're just speeding up from that process. With the higher end buyers, they've done this, right? So that hand-holding is less important, I guess. But what's important is that attention to detail, understanding their brief, not wasting their time, because a lot of these guys are busy. They know what they want. It's just that how are you going to add value further on into that process? And that value proposition, if I had to break it down, doesn't only mean me opening doors for these guys. I often say sourcing the property is the easiest part of my job, right? The real value comes after that. What are you looking at in terms of the overlays, the easements, the aspects? Some of these clients of mine are brilliant at what they do, run their businesses. But when it comes to property, guess what? It's probably their third transaction, second transaction in their life. The previous transaction, probably 7 to 10 years ago. The market's shifted. Asset classes have shifted as well. Prices have shifted. And it's my duty then to keep them updated with the current present, environment that we're in right now. So with the higher end, it's all about understanding firstly, okay, it's this going to serve you now just for the next 5 years? What are your future plans? What's your goal in 10 years from now? Because a lot of these guys have aspirations to then upgrade again, right? Are you looking at adding value? Because a lot of them have got that extra cash behind them. Every client that I deal with is different. And that's what really makes my job quite interesting in that sense, right? Like you get to dive deeply into each client, understand really what's important for them, and then strategize and formulate a strategy to get them along with their journey.
Yeah, and I think one of the points around attention to detail, even, and I think it is this investment banker, your commerce degree that you've gone and done, is that you're a data-driven person.
Mm-hmm.
You track the data. And as an example, we were looking at some stuff just before, and you were saying, actually, the data is now old because it was a month ago, and it's settled data. The difference between settled data that's gone through the valuer general that then has reached the systems and gone back into the public versus what's happened last week, there's a latency of about 3 months that actually sits there that most people don't know. So particularly in some of the markets that you're operating in the higher end, there is scarcity of stock. And so 10 sales that have happened in the last 2 weeks can have a material impact on what has actually happened in that market versus the data that they could be looking at that they think is relevant and they think is updated and fresh. But the reality is it's 3 months old.
Agreed. That's a really good point. For me, look, I think data paints a picture of what's going on in the marketplace. But for me, I look at the role of an advocate to be a lot more, to be a lot deeper than just face value of data. What I mean by that, if you're looking at, let's call it the auction clearance rates, what the auction clearance rates doesn't really report is properties that have been postponed, for example, in the second week of the auction. Agents normally have a 4-week campaign. If it starts getting postponed, some outlets, some data centers do not actually calculate that in the auction clearance rates. What it doesn't tell you as well is that how are these auction clearance rates derived as far as the actual sales of the property? Let me take a step back. What we've seen recently is there's been a pullback of buyers. If you've got a one-person auction and it still sells post-negotiation, how much does it tell you about the strength of the actual market?
And that still counts as solid auction.
Agreed, right? So for me, looking at data is important, but being an advocate, what I do, being a local market expert, it's about digging a lot deeper into that. Being able to be in a position where I'm able to advise my clients, look, we know that these prices have sold for X amount, right? But let's talk about the depth of that buyer pool, what you're up against. For me, that's important because my job is to protect my buyers. And by protecting my buyers, firstly, I've got to understand how I'm going up against the agents themselves. Secondly, I need to know the other buyers in the marketplace and I'm up against so that we're not overpaying, so that we're protecting our strategy and so on and so forth. I'll give you one example. There was a couple of years ago in Northbridge. An auction happened and it just went out of control. Price guide I remember back then, might be wrong, but let's call it 5.5. Property was probably worth 6. Went to auction, sold for about 7.3. Okay. Wow, big result. Everyone's talking about it. But when I dove deeper into that actual campaign, what I kind of realized was I was watching the auction. 3 buyers were carrying that price all the way up to 7. The 4th buyer in place was capped out at 6.2. Okay. So this was my hypothesis around that. The next 2 homes that comes up, which was similar to this one that sold, you've got deep pockets there, right? The minute the market absorbs these 2 buyers, I think it's going to go back to a normalized market because you talk about the depth of the buyer. When I was selling, I often tell my clients, you and I as vendors and an agent, we could sit here all day and talk about what your property's worth. The reality is, I'm not the one writing you the check. The buyers are. So for me, that focus has always been about who's out there. How deep are these pockets, right? So anyways, what happened? The next property came up to the market, traded for 7 3/4. Following property that came up again, traded for again 7. Every agent then thought this is the new benchmark of the area, okay? The following 4th property that came up to the market again with the expectations of 7 to 8 million, guess what happened? Nothing. Why? That buy pool just wasn't there to support those price points.
Interesting.
So for me as an advocate, I look at prices, right? Every now and then you get an anomaly with a price. You've got to understand what drove that result. And based on that information, I then have to guide my clients accordingly and be responsible. Because going back to what you said about, being responsible for our clients, I think part of what we do is we're advisors. My job is to kind of protect my clients' interest long term. What I mean by that, it's not only about just making sure that they're buying and moving them on. It's about making sure that the asset that we're purchasing, firstly, is a good asset. Plans change with people. The general person moves in 7 to 10 years. What happens if you've got a job in a different country or something happens and you've got to sell in 2 years? I want to then make sure that we're protecting your asset from day one. I had a debate with a mate of mine who said, look, real estate grows long term. We all know that. Okay. I agree to some extent. The part I don't agree is if you were to buy it at a big premium, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to grow. Look at it this way. Let's call it baseline level tier, $5 million. And if you're willing to say, pay a 20% premium, what's that? Like $6 million on it, right? You're starting here. I disagree that the growth is going to start at 6 million up. Yep. The growth starts at 5 million. So hypothetically, if you bought at 5 million and the market, say, grows at 4% for the next 2 years, you're still behind.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
And a lot of people tend to disagree, but I'm looking at facts again, going back to data.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at how many houses. And I've got case study of homes that were trading during the peak of the market in COVID at massive premiums. Some were bought by buyers because of that FOMO. Some were just buyers agents buying irresponsibly. And those homes have now since traded in the last 12 months.
Yep.
And guess what? Their clients have lost money, or these vendors have lost money. So for me, it's about what's our role as advocates out there? Are we just there to open doors, show homes, push our clients into deals? I personally disagree, right? I personally think that there's so much more than that.
Mm-hmm.
I run my business based on 3 different philosophies, and I'm stealing this from a mentor of mine, Casey, because it resonates so well with me. Our job, my job, is to lead, to serve, and to protect my clients at all costs through this journey, through clarity, to give them confidence, to help them make that best decision when they're purchasing their property. And that comes back to the philosophy that you guys have at FOUNDIT, the data and all that.
So so we don't get ahead of ourselves, you've transitioned out of sales and you get the inspiration that you want to go into buyer's agency. Yep. What sparked that? How did you end up in the space?
I started off in real estate as in the selling side, but as a buyer manager, right? Being part of that McGrath brand. McGrath had this massive ethos around work with your buyers, focus on them because they'll eventually be your vendors. Mm-hmm. So, and I've always had this passion about helping people long term, right? Like understanding their needs. So I used to spend, my callbacks didn't used to be 1-2 minutes after an open home. I would be spending 20-30 minutes on each client because I genuinely wanted to help them get to their dreams, to the point where, Gus, I was sending them homes that I thought was suitable for them that were not necessarily our listings. They were the Bells, the Ray Whites, and I had clients giving me feedback like, what are you doing this, right? And I'm like, mate, I think the house suits you. Go and have a look. And very often they would end up buying those homes and they would thank me for it. So I had a knack for firstly understanding my clients because of that level of care and that level of interest in what they were looking for.
Yeah.
And it just kind of sort of made sense at that point. I was like, look, I'm really good at the buy work. That kind of sparked that interest of me being a buyer's agent. But in saying that, when that thought initially arose, that was in 2018, I was also just at the early stages of my selling career. And my first boss always told me, look at real estate, right? As the first couple of years as a degree.
Yep.
You'll learn the trade for 3-4 years. You got to be patient. And at some point, it's going to drop. As long as you're doing the right thing, as long as you're disciplined with your processes, you will get there. So I was investing all this time. I was in the office at 7:30. I'll finish at 6:37. Put on my trainers, and I'll go and let it drop till about 8:30, 9 o'clock. Back then, the hustle was real. And it got to a point I was like, I'm not going to give up. I'm just going to see this side of my career out first. Yeah. And if nothing happens, maybe I'll consider buyer's agency. And I really started getting traction in 2019. And at that point, I thought, let's just ride this wave as long as I can. But still, my passion was always helping buyers. The number of times there was this one party I remember back then, spoke to this lady for about 3-4 months. She had constantly missed out on a few things, really got to understand what she was after, down to the nitty gritty of what was important, her non-negotiables, so on and so forth. And we happened to list a home, I remember, in Northbridge. And I said, hey, I think this home suits you really well. Just come and have a look at it. And she was like, look, she came in, initial thoughts are like, no, going to walk away. I was like, fair enough. Called her the next week, just again to explore, see what was about that home that you didn't like, or like what didn't suit you, and so on and so forth. And she didn't really have an answer. But for me, deep down inside, I'm like, I've spoken to you for the last 4 months. We've been on this journey. I think this is the home for you. So I said, humor me, come back for a second infection. And if you really think it's not for you, we'll continue the search. I'll help you find other opportunities. She comes back, warms up to the idea. Third time, okay. Level of interest went up. Couple of inspections later, bought the house. Calls me and says, I just want you to know, And I wanted to say thank you because you saw something in this that we didn't even realize that we wanted. And for me, that was powerful. I keep going back to that scenario. And I think that was one of the moments where I'm like, maybe I should start, going to the buyer's agency space.
Yeah. On that topic, what do you think makes, what is the right mindset to have for a successful buyer, whether an investor or owner occupier? How should they approach the transaction and how they're about to go into making the decision? Do you see a particular mindset with people that you're like, okay, you're ready to buy, or no, we need to go through an education process here so that you better understand the market? Do you see that in people?
Yes, I think often. I mean, I spoke to a client yesterday and I straight up told him, I said, mate, respectfully, I don't think you're ready to buy. I think generally speaking, when someone's quite ready to make a move, ideal majority of my buyers are actually owner occupiers, right? So what I'm about to say, it's really based on that. But owner occupiers literally, they normally narrow down their areas into 2-3 different suburbs.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first thing. The clarity in terms of where they want to buy is very, very clear. Reason for that, a lot of the decisions are made based on where the kids are going to school, where their actual community is, family, friends, where work is, and all that. These are the main 3 drivers that normally get someone into a particular area in that mindset. Buyers who are ready to buy have often also missed out on things. They've got a clear understanding. That's another thing I normally ask clients when I first speak to them. What have you missed out on? This, that, why are you moving? Some people have this aspiration to move, but they're not necessarily ready. The finances are not in place. They don't have a clear idea of what they can actually get. They have it in mind, I could borrow 3. I think I'm going to spend $3 million on a freestanding home in Mossman, for example, or in a loan offshore. Almost impossible.
Yeah.
At least with very little compromises. So, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think makes a great buyer's agent? And what are some of the things that aren't obvious to a buyer or the general public that is making a great buyer's agent fantastic at what they do?
This is a personal thought of mine.
Yep.
Yeah. This is how I've chosen to run my business and my dealings. I keep going back to what an advocate's role is supposed to be. That lead, serve, and protect your clients, right? But if you break that down, how do we get there and provide that full package as a buyer's agent? Firstly, I think you need to be very client focused. Level of care needs to be a 10 out of 10. The empathy factor, I think, is big because it is an emotional journey that buyers go through. And at times, as a buyer's agent, you are playing the role of a counselor. You are having to help husbands and wives decide. And sometimes when they miss out, how do you then manage them and keep them calm? Because the biggest mistake I've seen in real estate, both on the selling and buying side, is that people act based on impulse and emotions. Once you get emotions in play, you're out the door. I mean, let's look at sales strategy. Why are auction campaigns a 4-week campaign? It's so that the emotions are high, right? The saying goes, time kills deals. If a buyer of mine walks into a home and they love it and they're like, Sean, I love this, I'm going to make an offer, I'll pull them back. I said, for me, my rule is we're not putting offers on the first visit, right? Because I understand that level of emotions are just sky high. Let's get you back for the second time, third time if we have to, because then you start getting logical. And you often see that happening with people. So client focus, I think it's important. Having the right honesty, integrity. I think having that selling side experience in in real estate is really, really important. I'll even go as far as saying, I think every good buyer's agent needs to have that experience. Why? When you're buying a property, firstly, it's all about the process. We're going up against selling agents who are masters at what they do, right? So if you're going up with no selling experience, firstly, you're not understanding the strategies that are in play. You're not understanding the tactics that they're using, the psychology behind what selling agents are saying, the psychology behind what the vendors are thinking, right? You're not understanding price guides. A lot of people look at price guides as the holy grail, right? And inexperienced buyers, at least, or buyers agents, they look at a price guide being presented. They kind of, agree with that price guide based on the comparables that's been provided by the selling agents, not realizing that a price guide is firstly, you've got a 10% range. Let's call it 4 million to 4.4. In theory, if you're guiding 4, the vendor wants 4.4. Now, how's the agent going to form that price guide? He's going to put different comparables within that to support that price guide.
Of course.
What you don't understand is that is quite subjective. You could push that any way you want, right? If the vendor's aspirational price is up in the clouds, you're going to put certain comparables which are not really comparables to support that decision. In hindsight, if on the flip side, if you're trying to underquote and get it going, you're going to put some inferior properties to support your price guide. So this, for me, I think it's where I'm seeing out there the lack of know-how in terms of the selling process. And this is where I think a lot of buyer's agents get stuck.
Yeah,
that lack of that selling side experience.
Yeah,
that selling side experience. Let's talk about price guides as well, right? A good buyer's agent, in my mind, needs to be able to confidently and independently learn how to establish price guides or price or estimates on a property that you're looking at.
Yeah.
Again, what I'm seeing out there is a lot of these newer buyer's agents are looking at, depending on the agents. So in my mind, are you playing a role as a buyer's agent or are you playing a role as a selling agent's advocate? Right?
Yeah.
If you're a selling agent, I'm going into you, Gus. What's your guide? 4. Vendor wants 4.3, 4.4. Yeah, sweet. Okay, we'll put you an offer.
Yeah.
Right? That property might have been worth 3.5, but you see that happening constantly.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I think, having things like price discipline, being able to pull your clients back when you need to, knowing how to strategize in campaigns, understanding the macro level of certain markets, being a true local market expert is also what I think is key. And this goes far beyond knowing the street names, the owner of the cafe around the street, the schools, the bus routes. It goes far deeper than that. It's understanding things like the overlays, the conservations, your heritage, certain pockets. If you look at Willoughby, for an example, North Willoughby, you've got certain stretches where it's full knockdown rebuild. Very different demographics are going to look in that area. The depth of those pockets are looking at that area is quite different compared to certain pockets of that whole area in general. Understanding land sizes, understanding the depth of each particular market, which then moves sometimes every week, every month, every quarter. So this is where I've never believed in a notion of being an expert in Greater Sydney.
Yeah.
Personally, for me, I work like crazy hours. And even with that, with on my team, I don't have that capacity to be covering all of Sydney. Let me give you an example. Gus, you're a buyer's agent covering Greater Sydney. I'm focusing in my core areas, the north. You and I both buy a house in Mossman today. Okay. You've gotten to know the area. I'm staying in Mossman. You are now buying in the east, St. George, Greater Sydney, wherever that is. You don't come back until 8 months down the track. You get another mandate. You're back in the air all over again. Yes, you've got that local knowledge of the streets. But when you're looking at a home, how do you know what the market's been doing in the last 4 weeks, 3 weeks? Going back to the depth of that buyer pool.
Yeah.
How many numbers of shoes am I seeing at each open home? That for me, that's my definition of being a true market knowledge expert.
Yeah, and it's so true. And it's one of the things that is at the core of Founder and what the problem is that we're trying to solve, which is 25 years ago, when you bought a property, that process is exactly the same as today. And what I mean by that is you might be shopping on a list view online versus a list view in the paper. You still buy on 2 5-minute inspections and a handful of comparable sales that have been cherry-picked from the sales agent. Now, that's not to say that the agent's doing anything that's dodgy. They are there to serve the vendor and maximize the sale price for the vendor.
100% agreed.
That's 100% what they're doing, and they do a great job of it. But the difference is 25 years ago, that property was probably worth 60 grand and you could repay the mortgage on average in 6.5 years. That same asset today is worth millions and is a 25 to 30 year mortgage commitment. And people are still buying on 2 5-minute inspections and a handful of comparable sales from the real estate agent versus what they get by partnering with someone like you with local market expertise of deep knowledge, not of just what is happening in the static data that they can see that's actually 3 months old that's just been made available this week, but they've got real-time information at their fingertips. And so one of the things we've found is how do we help elevate you and how do we help to give you the best data, the best research in market, the best technology to then better serve your clients as well.
And great point though. And that's one thing I think attracted me to you guys, right? I've always had that mindset of being a student in life. I want to be the best at what I do. And in my role, I take what I do very seriously. And my ultimate job is to make sure that I'm elevating the experience for my clients through that journey of buying property. As a buyer's agent, we spend a lot of time looking at open homes. Between my and myself, we look at on average 60, 70 properties a week, not necessarily with clients, but just to, again, get an overview of what our core market area is doing. You calculate that, break it down to number of hours you're spending on the road. How much time do we then have in the back end to do data? A lot of buyer's agents, and I think that's where they struggle with, right? A lot of them are dependent on portals like the RP Datas, your price finders, which we know, we've said this before, data tells you a small picture. But for me, having Kent, who's a freak, by the way, getting to know him, he's an animal. But to have him in my back pocket, I feel that kind of completes me as an operator. Having Meegs in the background with all this automation, that's again freeing up my time to do things which are more dollar productive for my clients. Because like you said, the ultimate goal is to make sure that we're providing the best service. We're here to lift up the standards. The industry is getting a bad name. I'm not going to be shy about that, right? You look at the last couple of years, you've had an influx of new buyers agents coming into the market, and you hear stories about how things are being done out there. And it kills me because I love what I do. But for me, my goal is to, again, let's lift the standards, because I truly believe that most buyers need a buyer's agent out there. Like being a selling agent, again, I used to witness buyers are just like blind sheeps, just going with the flow, listening to agents, getting lied to. And a lot of them fail to understand that these selling agents have done this for years, for decades. A lot of them have got coaches within the businesses. Like they are trained, seasoned professionals, right? Buyers are not equipped with that. So for me, it's about making sure that the buyers are getting the right representation on their side. That's going to sort of even the playing field.
Was there a particular thing that attracted you to the FOUNDIT business model?
I think a lot of it was back to the efficiency of how I could work as an operator, right? And how those efficiencies would help me then elevate the service that I'm providing for my clients. I think the world's moving. We can't, make no mistake about that. AI, integration, technology. And I think a lot of buyer's agent models out there are being left behind with times. And for me, I think about adopting these technologies, because what could we achieve with the outcome? A better experience for buyers in general. Data for me is big. I've always been about data. Having that backup coupled with my sort of like local knowledge, I think that's just going to give my clients a lot more confidence and clarity, which is what we're here for.
I think one of the ones that you and I had a bit of amusement with was when you first joined, you're like, okay, I'm going to test out our head of research. Let's actually see how good this guy is. And again, you said that there's a property that was traded just at the end of last year. This is in December. I think it was December when it was traded.
We're trying. It hasn't traded, but we were trying to have a crack at that.
And we were like, okay, there's no data available on it. You just left him alone and said, I want to see how you go. How did he go with it in comparison?
And this was where it was scary, right? I mean, the guy's, where is he? Newcastle, right? Sitting in front of his computer and he's just doing his thing.
With his full screen.
Right? Like maybe 6 at this point. And it was wild. Like the variance came in, literally, I think it was a variance of 5%, which was impressive. And for me, it's all about like, okay, you might have punched it out. And there's an element of me, I always like challenging. I like facts, right? You can't beat facts. That's what I believe. So I kind of went back and said, all right, tell me how you did this. And he sent me the detailed report. And looking at it, it's like, all right, let's look at an element, for example, the views. We're going to score this as a percentage versus this one here. There were ratios that were being played. In some ways, that was exactly like, I loved it because that's how I think. I've done this long enough, and to put things in words, it's hard because it's like clockwork for me. But when I analyze an actual property, I go far beyond just looking at 3 comparables. Because I believe that no property is the same. You've got areas, you've got aspects, you've got views, you've got things like easements, you've got the scarcity factor, right? All of that, like everything in my mind has got a different grade. And from that, I'm formulating, coupled with what the market's currently doing, the strength, the depth of the market, I'm formulating that in my head. And for what he's done without being there, hey, the guy's seen, 12 photos, put it that way. And to punch out a number that was fairly accurate, I thought that was great. I mean, even RP data, the variance between RP data's figures and mine was close to like double, 50.
And for people's reference, so Kent's, his background is he was co-founder of Pricefinder, and then went after that business was sold to or acquired by Domain, went and ran CoreLogic as one of the top execs there. So he has built the data lakes which most agents actually use, and he also knows where the discrepancies sit within it, and he's been able to rebuild this stuff and actually bring it to the table with FOUNDIT to say, here is an edge for every buyer in the space that he sees the same thing that we do, which is that buyers are underserved. And then you look at the technology angle of which we're launching in the coming weeks is you can upload your brief. So what you're great at is you will sit down with that client and you're getting bed, bath, car, you're getting suburb, you're getting price, but you're going so much deeper than that. North-facing aspect. You want it to be a walk to a particular landmark. You want it to have a ground floor bedroom because they're going to be downsizing. All of these things that you capture in a very detailed consultation when you sit down with your clients, that you understand their needs better than them, probably.
Agreed.
When we capture that information, the ability to then be able to go and hit the databases of real estate agencies and pull out pre-market, off-market, and on-market listings to start helping you source property. Is a really powerful thing that when our belief is, I'm reading an article in which we shared with everyone in the US is saying, instead of building software that you go and sell to Goldman Sachs for $2,000, become the Goldman Sachs that is technology enabled that disrupts the whole model. And that's very similar to our thinking of how we're approaching the buyer agent space here is instead of just selling software to people, let's actually build something that can outlast all of us, that truly changes the way and the construct of the market of how people buy property as well.
I mean, for me, that's a tech piece that excites me. I think one of the things that we're lacking in the last 12 months is the lack of quality stock. So my team and I, we do drive-bys. We look back through REA. Sometimes we identify certain streets based on the floor plans or houses based on the old floor plans to make sure that they're really suited to our clients. We go through the rental market to see what's available and try to hit up landlords. But with that tech, all of a sudden, you're speeding up that process for me. And it goes back to, again, being the most efficient model of what we can do in our space. And for me, I can't wait for that to actually kickstart and to take place.
One of the things that we spoke about early days was culture before you're joining. And I think that we make sure that we advocate for what our culture is inside of the business. I would be curious just to ask you on the spot of what's your observations of the culture within the business?
It's been great so far. I'll give you that. I think when I joined, I was reflecting on this last night. Like it all happened out of the blue. We met in very late November. Wasn't even looking. Met up with Ben, great guy. And I think I had 4 different meetings with 4 separate people in the company. And I remember this quite clearly. I wanted you guys to know exactly what I stand for. And a lot of businesses out there are worried about the top line revenue, right? Transactions, deals, It's never been a way that I've run my model because I believe in advocating for my clients. And I believe that some of these things take time. If I was hoping for a 4-week turnaround, I might as well just stayed in the selling side. I'll be honest with you, but I'm here to help. So I remember telling Ben, I said, mate, I'm going to go months sometimes without buying. You've got to make sure that from a business point of view, am I even the right fit for you? I was kind of trying to push back at that point because I was settled. I'll be honest with you. And then I thought, okay, I'm never going to hear from this guy again. And then you guys reached out and said, okay, we'll meet. And then I met Nick Dowling and then and one thing led to another. And the thing that stuck out was these guys share the same value, the same vision of what I'm trying to put out there in the marketplace. And that for me means a lot. I've seen a lot of businesses which are just thinking about the top line. Buyers agents out there charging 1%, for example, or flat fee or a very low fee just to get that turnover. And by doing that sort of model, you're not really then advocating for your clients because it becomes a business. I see it more of you do the right thing, you bring honesty, integrity, and if you're really good at what you do, that money is going to flow. And that was what I really respected of what you guys did. Now that we've been with you guys for 2 months now, the culture's been great. I love the fact that there's this collaboration. I'm on the phone with Tom every week just to get a color of Melbourne. He's built a successful business. He's now head of, sales for us and stuff. But it's so good for me to be able to draw that experience from him as well. I think having the sounding board with, yourself, with Joel, with Ken, I think that's always great because sometimes we get stuck in certain things that we need different perspectives. Right? Like the whole, what's that chat group that we have in the morning again?
FOUNDIT Fast Forward group.
The Fast Forward group, that's correct, sorry. Where everyone's kind of geeing each other up to stay fit.
Yeah.
Because fitness means a lot for us, right? It's like health equals wealth. That, for me, that accountability is what's great. But everyone that I've met, mate, there's good people all around. The
There
vibes
is.
are good.
Yeah,
That's, for
we're
me,
really,
it's important.
really proud of the culture of the people that we brought in. And it is a part of the process as to why people meet with 4 different people within the business so that we have a really good sense check of, is this person going to align to the culture or not? And then by extension, you know that the next person is coming on is going through that same process.
And that builds trust within the brand, right? And because of what we're trying to build here, you're talking about, a national coverage. We need that trust between buyers agents. Because if I were to put my name forward, I need to make sure the next person that's going to take on that client of mine is going to represent them the same way that I'd expect to represent 100%. My clients. So I think, the culture's been amazing so far. And I can't wait to see what we're going to achieve as a team.
Well, last question for you is, what are you excited about for the next 12 months?
Oof. Good one. I'm excited to grow within this brand. I'm excited to grow the brand within my marketplace. More importantly, I think I'm excited to grow from a personal standpoint of view. To be a better operator, to be a better person. I think I told you this at the start of this year. It's been the most challenging start because you guys have forced me to stretch my thinking. And I've always been an advocate about being a better me. I want to be able to look back at this year and said that FOUNDIT has helped me achieve or take my business to the next level. My clients are in a better place because of this decision I've made to jump on board with FOUNDIT, to have a team that is going to be respected out there in the marketplace, to be a better husband, a dad. So yeah, in a whole, to be a better person.
Well, Sean, first podcast of many, but again, thank you for entrusting us and partnering with us. It's going to be an exciting 12 months and beyond.
Thanks, Gus. Look, it's an absolute privilege. Thank you for trusting me with this as well. And I look forward to building a future with you guys.